February 8, 2026, Malaysia Political and Economic Brief, Catch of the Week, Corruption Cases and Government Procurement, a stress test of governance credibility. Malaysia's current political economic reality is no longer shaped solely by growth projections, fiscal arithmetic, or coalition maneuvering. Increasingly, it is defined by how the state manages accountability at the intersection of power, money, and institutions. A series of high-profile governance cases spanning defense procurement, former prime ministers, and prominent figures in Islamic finance has placed the rule of law under sustained scrutiny from society, markets, and institutions alike. The core national question is no longer whether accountability exists in principle, but whether it can be applied consistently, predictably, and without political distortion when elite interests and sensitive sectors are involved. At the center of this governance stress test stands the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission, operating in conjunction with the Attorney General's chambers and the judicial system. Together, these institutions form the backbone of the national accountability architecture. Their credibility does not hinge on dramatic arrests or headline-grabbing seizures, but on the integrity of process itself, how investigations are conducted, how prosecutorial discretion is exercised, and whether cases ultimately withstand judicial scrutiny. In an environment of low political trust, every action or delay resonates far beyond the courtroom, shaping public perceptions of justice, fairness, efficiency, and institutional independence. The recently announced defense procurement investigation clearly illustrates why governance failures in specific sectors can generate disproportionate national-level risk. The MACC has confirmed impending charges against two former top military leaders, the former chief of the Defense Forces and the former Army chief, over allegations involving corruption, abuse of power, criminal breach of trust, and the unlawful receipt of gifts linked to defense procurement. This immediately triggered institutional and political responses. As a preventive measure, the government froze the relevant procurements and initiated a governance review at the administrative level. This process unfolded within a broader constitutional framework led by Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim, while taking into account the role of the 𝙳𝚊𝚘𝚑𝚍 as Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces and His Majesty's repeated emphasis on integrity, accountability, and public confidence in the defense procurement system. From a political economy perspective, this response functioned as a classic tone-from-the-top intervention. Defense procurement concentrates large budgets, opaque supplier ecosystems, and extensive discretionary authority justified on national security grounds, making it globally a high-risk governance domain. Once integrity is questioned, the impact is twofold. Potential resource leakage undermines fiscal efficiency, while procurement decisions perceived to serve personal interests rather than operational or security needs erode the credibility of national security itself. Consequently, regardless of eventual convictions, the executive signal to tighten oversight and controls carries independent and substantial significance. However, the case also exposes recurring weaknesses in public discourse. Allegations remain allegations, not convictions. Freezing procurement is a preventive governance tool, not a judicial verdict. Conflating investigation with guilt undermines due process and weakens the very rule of law norms reform agendas seek to strengthen. The unresolved policy question is whether procurement reform will be institutionalized through stricter conflict of interest disclosures, beneficial ownership verification, and ex-post audits, or whether it will fade once political attention shifts. A different governance tension emerges in the investigation involving former Prime Minister 𝙬𝚊𝚘𝚍𝚘. Here, scrutiny centers on alleged irregularities in government publicity expenditure and public procurement during his administration. Enforcement authorities have confirmed that he submitted asset declarations and cooperated with questioning, while investigators seized large sums of cash and gold and detained senior officials linked to the case. By mid-2025, the investigation report had been submitted to the Attorney General's chambers followed by the initiation of asset forfeiture proceedings. Investigations involving former prime ministers are inherently sensitive and carry significant systemic impact. On one hand, they test the principle that no one is above the law. On the other, they inevitably invite accusations of selective enforcement. Economically, the central issue is the credibility of public spending systems. Leakages in procurement or publicity expenditure translate directly into fiscal waste, weakening confidence at a time when Malaysia is pursuing subsidy rationalization, reinforcing fiscal discipline, and signaling policy credibility to investors. Two distorted perceptions dominate public narratives. First, the assumption that asset seizure automatically implies personal guilt. This is incorrect. Asset forfeiture and criminal liability follow distinct legal pathways, each requiring evidentiary proof in court. Second, the interpretation of delayed charges as political stalling. In reality, complex financial investigations often demand extended evidence review. While concerns about reputational damage from prolonged silence are understandable, legally binding outcomes remain confined to prosecutions and judicial rulings. The case involving 𝙤𝚊𝚘𝚍 has progressed further within the judicial process. He faces multiple charges relating to alleged abuse of power and the receipt of illicit proceeds amounting to 432.5 million ringgit, with trial proceedings scheduled for March 2026. The alleged conduct occurred during the pandemic period, situating the case at the intersection of emergency procurement mechanisms, political financing, and crisis governance. From a rule of law standpoint, this case demonstrates both institutional resilience and public misunderstanding. Earlier, some charges were struck out by the High Court due to deficiencies in wording, only to be reinstated by the Court of Appeal. This underscores that prosecution is not merely about making accusations, but about whether legal provisions are sufficiently precise to withstand scrutiny. Procedural dismissal does not equate to factual innocence, just as reinstatement does not imply guilt. The decisive test remains the trial itself. Taken together, these cases constitute a comprehensive stress test of Malaysia's governance architecture. The defense procurement investigation tests institutional resolve under conditions of high secrecy. The 𝙬𝚊𝚘𝚑 case examines prosecutorial timeliness and communication discipline, and the 𝙤𝚊𝚘𝚑 trial evaluates whether sensitive cases can proceed under rigorous scrutiny without succumbing to perceptions of selective justice. Their combined impact through investor pricing decisions, bureaucratic morale, and public trust collectively shapes the confidence foundation of national governance. A fourth dimension lies outside the courtroom but is no less consequential. The case involving 𝚤𝚊𝚘𝚑 highlights governance challenges within the corporate and financial ecosystem rather than criminal liability. As a globally recognized Islamic finance authority, his extensive advisory roles reflect Malaysia's success in exporting Islamic expertise, while simultaneously exposing tensions around role concentration and conflict of interest management. No criminal wrongdoing has been established. The core issue lies in governance design and public perception. The unresolved systemic challenge is how to maintain global competitiveness while ensuring institutional resilience, anchoring credibility in systems rather than individuals. Ultimately, the credibility of Malaysia's rule of law depends not on who is charged, but on whether procedures, from investigation to adjudication, are applied consistently. These cases are not merely about individuals. They test whether institutions can deliver firm, fair, and predictable accountability. In this sense, the present moment is less a crisis than an opportunity to embed reform as institutional practice rather than political slogan. 𝙬𝚊𝚑𝚍